Hey folks, Chris here. Welcome to another episode of Cardboard Dragon Reviews. It's been a very long time, but today we are taking a look at something different for the channel, and that's an RPG. We're taking a look at the starter set for Dungeons and Dragons. Where have I been all these months? Well, I've been lazy, but aside from that, I've actually not been doing as much board gaming because I've started playing D&D, which is something I never thought I'd do in my life. So I wanted to give you my thoughts on the starter set, and I guess just D&D and RPGs in general, because this is the first one I've ever played. So let's take a look. So before I get into my review, I just want to talk a bit about my background with RPGs, because there's probably a lot of people who are very similar to me. In that I had no experience with RPGs prior to buying this starter set, and negative interest in playing them. Never thought it would be something I would do. But in fairness, didn't really know a whole lot about D&D outside of maybe some comics and Baldur's Gate, things like that. And I think it's becoming more and more mainstream with its inclusion in the TV show or Netflix show Stranger Things. But what really got my attention was Acquisitions Incorporated, which is a ongoing game run by people at Penny Arcade with probably one of the best DMs who's ever been, in Christopher Perkins. And I just found it really entertaining. But even still, I wasn't quite sure about playing, but ended up talking to some of my board gaming people and had another person who was interested in playing. One of my board gaming people had played years and years ago back at Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and ended up picking this up at $15 Canadian. So if you're American, if you can find it on sale, that's a pretty good deal, and a pretty low point of entry for trying something like this out. So that's a bit of background. I ended up picking it up, and I'll give you my review now on what you get. So there's a few things you get inside the box, and like I said, I paid a grand total of $15 Canadian for this, so it's a very low barrier to entry. But you get a set of dice here. These are the typical RPG dice. 4-sided, 6-sided, 8-sided, 10-sided, 12-sided, and 20-sided dice, and they're good quality dice. You get an abbreviated set of rules, which is this smaller rule book here. You get a campaign, which is this bigger book here. This is what the kind of story, if you want to take it that way, that your characters will be playing through. And then you get a bunch of blank character sheets. So these are pre-made, or sorry, they're not blank. They're pre-made character sheets. You do get some blank ones that you can fill in yourself, but the box comes with a bunch of prefabricated ones with some blank information, like you can fill in some details here, but most of it's prefabricated. So that's what you get for your $15 for me. I'm going to go through each of these items one at a time and tell you what I think. So the dice, as I mentioned, they're very good quality dice. You have most of what you need with them, but what's missing here, and granted you don't use it very much, is what's called a percentile dice. So that's something that looks like this. It's got the 10s on it. You do get a 10-sided die here, and you can get away without having one of these by messing around with other dice, but it's easy if you have two of them and you can just roll them together, and we would have there a 79. So there's one sort of dice that typically comes when you order RPG dice that's not included in the box, but granted you don't use it very much. At least we've never used it very much. Now I would suggest, if you are going to play this, that you do pick up more dice. It's nice if everybody has a complete set like this, so you're not having to share dice. But if you don't want to be spending that money, you can get by on this. But just know you're going to have to be passing the dice around a lot and sharing them amongst each other. So then we have the rule book here, which isn't that long, and which is, to its credit, reading this, the game does not come off as intimidating at all. Now, it helps to have seen something like Acquisitions Incorporated or somebody else play the games so you have a general idea of what D&D even is to begin with, or role-playing in general. But it wasn't intimidating to read through this. And the 5th edition of the game seems like it's much more streamlined. What I've read of the other editions, from playing Baldur's Gate, for instance, this seems a lot more streamlined and simple than what things previously were. Now, of course, with this being an RPG, you could make your own system or make things as complicated as you want, or as your DM wants. So, but for us who are new players, I think this was a great system to start on. However, because maybe it's just because it was me and I was going to be the DM, I wanted to know a lot more about the game than what was presented in this book. And I ended up Googling a lot of things that were, I think, probably intentionally omitted from the book to make it less intimidating for folks. But I ended up Googling a lot of things. Now, one thing that is not here, unless I totally miss it, but I haven't seen it, was what to do when you have varying sizes of parties. Now, that's explained in the Dungeons Master Guide, which is another book, like a $60 book. But it's not explained here. So my party was 3 players, which I believe this is designed for 4 or 5 players. So how are you supposed to balance that? It's not too terribly difficult to do following the guidelines in the Dungeon Master's Guide, but you need, it's not in this book, and you would need a bit more explanation. You probably might also need the monster manual to be able to do that properly. So I can see why they omitted it, but some guidance on that would have been helpful. Then we have the pre-made character sheets. So I can see why this might be good for certain people who just kind of want to jump into the game, who aren't really that creative or can't get the creative juices flowing, aren't sure. I think it's a good example of what a completed character sheet can look like. You can see the back is filled out here a lot too, even to talking about what happens when your character gains level. However, this to me is the biggest misstep with this starter set. I really don't like these. For one, I found it very confusing. I could not understand where a lot of these numbers came from. How are they coming up with these numbers? How do you calculate your attack bonus? How do you calculate your damage bonus? So what I ended up finding online was what I wish would have been in the starter set, but I see why they didn't do it, because they don't want to be overbearing. But it was like, okay, you're +2 here in strength. This is how we got these modifiers. This is how you get these numbers. Your armor class, this is how we got that number. Your initiative, this is how we got that number. Those things, I had to look them up, and I was very confused just looking at this sheet, trying to figure out how they came up with these numbers. Now, my other big problem with having these pre-made and with is that for a lot of people, for a lot of players especially, they want to be making their own characters. It's really hard to role play, I think, something that you don't have a connection with. And when you make your own character, you make them what you want it to be. Like if you want to be a ranger and a female and an elf who's a bounty hunter who's going to wants to have animal companions. You can't really do that here because this is pre-made, but you can definitely do that if you are had some rules or guidance on how to create your character. Now again, this is a starter set, but I think that that's a core tenet of what makes RPGs fun, at least for my group. So I would have liked to have seen some guidance on how to make characters, but I don't know. I'd like to know what other starter sets D&D did. Maybe I should have looked that up. Have they always been pre-made characters, or did you have some freedom at some point? Was there a little less hand-holding at some point? with some guidance on how to make your character. I mean, even like leaving out these personality traits and stuff, that would have been nice. People could have filled in their own there. But anyway, I think for me, this was the biggest stumbling block. We never used any of these. And I just found them confusing until I understood how you actually make a character, which you don't know unless you buy the player's handbook or look online, whichever. So let's talk about the campaign itself, The Lost Mine of Phandelver. I do not have a bad thing to say about this. This module, if you will, this campaign, is worth the price of admission on its own. As a new DM, there's a lot of sections in here that guide you through how to run the sections, what to say to your players, what information should you be keeping to yourself, what information should you be telling the players. It gives you insight into how to role play certain characters, what to do if something goes bad. But I felt that, like, even as a brand new DM, I felt there was still room in here for me to insert my own ideas into the campaign, like NPCs or some of the things that people found. I made physical representations of some things that were found in the game. And I feel like this gave me the confidence to be able to come up with my own campaign, which we ended up playing after we got finished this. Now, you'd have to buy some more materials, namely the monster manual and probably the Dungeon Master Guide, unless you wanted to use the exact same monsters and stuff that are found in here. But I just found that this thing really set the stage for me, and I can't recommend this enough. I think you could go without the other items in this set, like the character sheets and the rules, if you had the player's handbook and were willing to put in the time to go through that. But as a new player, this thing was invaluable, and it's a lot of fun. It's really cool, and I really enjoyed playing through it. And I really like how, and maybe once you get more experience, it's not like this, but I really appreciated this, how it was laid out. It felt like a lot of work went into it, and it feels like a lot of the modules that they offer for this game sort of feel like this. I mean, I just got Curse of Strahd, which is another module, and looking at it looks really cool, and I feel like there's sort of a theme in how these things carry through. So I highly recommend, if you have, even if you just want a campaign to play through in your starting low-level characters, I think that this is a fun campaign to play through, so I definitely recommend it. All right, so that's just a brief look at the different pieces that are in the starter set. Overall, even with the faults that I mentioned, I think it's totally worth the money. It's a very low entry point. And even just for the campaign itself, I think it's worth the money. I found that it helped me a lot, though, that I ended up picking up the player's handbook early. Now, this thing is 300 pages long. This is sort of the main rule book, if you will, but this has the information in it to make your own characters. And if you're like me and you want to know more about what's going on, this explains most of the game. There are two other core books. That's the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual. I don't think you need those until you're starting to make your own campaign, but you definitely need the Monster Manual if you're going to be picking up modules later, because the later modules, they just, as far as I know, just mention monsters, and it's assumed that you already have the monster manual to look up those creatures. Now, I guess as far as going over D&D overall, like I said at the beginning, I was not ever expecting to play Dungeons and Dragons. It seemed like something I had no interest in. And I ended up DMing for my group, probably because I end up learning the rules for most of the games, and it just seemed like the natural fit. I ended up really enjoying it, and as I briefly mentioned, ended up making my own campaign, which opened up creative writing for me, and I haven't done creative writing for years and years and years. We haven't met for a while as a group, and it's actually making me kind of sad that we haven't. I really miss playing D&D. I miss getting together with my friends, having them play through the world that I made. I mean, we went so far into, we got a grid map that you can use for combat. As I said, we got extra books. I was printing off cardboard miniatures, and I even built a diorama of a battlefield that they ended up fighting in one time. The game, it's just amazing to me, even presented with like prefabricated ideas in the campaign. The cool thing is watching your players come up with different ways to solve what's put in front of them, because you as a dungeon master have most of the information, especially when you're working with a pre-made campaign, but you cannot know what your characters want to do. And they'll come up with really interesting ideas that you hadn't anticipated, such as going off and facing a really high level monster that you think would kill them, but ending up getting lucky and killing him, which you didn't anticipate, or taking people prisoner that you didn't think they would, or disliking characters that you thought would be good. There's all these different, you can't prepare for everything, and it is sort of intimidating as a DM to have to manage all that, but everybody in my group understood we were all learning together. And even though I fumbled through a lot of things, I still don't think I'm very good at what I'm doing, even though we've played many sessions and played through this full thing and had a few more sessions. I still don't feel like I know what I'm doing, but everybody at the table's been very good. If you had an experienced player, especially an experienced DM who was patient and willing to teach you, I think this would be awesome and a lot easier for everybody. But we were able to do it with no experience. I mean, the guy who had played before played like advanced D&D, which, looking at the rules, is just like a completely different beast. He's talking about concepts that no longer appear to exist in the game. But some things are familiar to him, which I think is pretty cool, like gauntlets of ogre strength. I think he knew those from years ago of playing. The hard thing, though, is totally the time commitment that this takes. Especially if you're the DM, you need to be prepared. You need to read the campaign in advance. And if you're making your own, I mean, that's a lot of work. It's like hours of work, and especially if you're printing off minis and stuff. But I found the time commitment worth it, and I thought it was a lot of fun. I had a really good time doing that for my players, and in truth, I totally miss it that we're not doing it anymore. So if you have an inkling of wanting to play this game, and especially if you have a couple of your friends who are kind of interested in playing it, I would say just get this starter set. And if you hate it, it was like $15 Canadian. So if you're an American watching this, that's not very much. That's like a cheap meal out, and amongst a whole bunch of people, it's totally worth it. And you'll get hours and hours of entertainment out of just the starter set box if you enjoy what you're doing. And if not, whatever, it's $15. But there's a whole world to explore if you get into this online, and it's just, there's so many helpful people, there's so many resources online. I would say if you have an inkling to want to give this a shot, hopefully you can find a couple people that you know. I'm glad I got to do this with people that I knew. I don't know if I would have done it with strangers at like a game store, for instance. But my preconceived notions of Dungeons and Dragons are gone. I think this is an amazing game. I mean, I'm starting on the 5th edition. I don't really know what the game used to be, but I know what it is now, and that's a lot of fun. So I do recommend the starter set. I think it's a low barrier to entry. If you hate it, whatever, you could probably sell it to somebody who just really wants a campaign or whatever. And at worst, you got a cool set of RPG dice. So until next time, this has been Chris for Cardboard Dragon Reviews. Keep your dice on the table.